Hi, I'm Ann Kim, a senior editor at the Washington Monthly, and I'm speaking today with the monthly's legal affairs editor, Garrett Epps. Our topic today is the legal basis for President Donald Trump's deployment of troops to U.S. cities, and we're going to get a fresh off the ground perspective on what's happening in war-ravaged Portland. Hey, Garrett, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, and I want to share with your viewers. I have my Portland Thorns soccer scarf on, and I'm wearing this urgently because the rumor is that Secretary Noem is going to designate our National Women's Soccer League team as a Venezuelan street gang and deport them. And so we really don't want you to do it because we're right on the bubble for the playoffs. It's a bad time to deport the team.
So you were in Portland not that long ago, and can
Yes.
you give us a sense of what things were actually like? You actually sent me pictures, which I'm going to embed into this recording later on, but what did you see?
Well, I would encourage anybody who is looking for a nice weekend to go to Portland and check it out. It's a city of 104 square miles, including a good deal of the Willamette River. I've rarely been prouder to be a resident and a teacher here in Oregon because the response to some fairly intense provocations from the federal government and from federal law enforcement has been to just say, whoopee, it's on. And so we have, for example, a couple that got married in animal suits, and they actually did, that was their actual wedding in front of the ICE facility. And then we have the Sunday, we had the World Naked Bicycle Ride, which they convened on an emergency basis and routed right past the ICE facility. So that, I mean, the ICE guys are probably pretty bored. And I think that was probably brightened up their day. But otherwise, it's by and large a very peaceful group. Periodically, there is violence, and there is violence because the ICE personnel emerge from their location and fire pepper balls or tear gas or whatever. I don't know if they're just reminding themselves that they're there or if they have a kind of need to use up the appropriation for munitions before the end of the fiscal year. But I can't quite figure out the pattern. No one can quite figure out the pattern. There seems to be a lot of hostility toward any protest activity. And it's
Mm.
important to understand that protest activity is protected by the First Amendment. That's expressive conduct. The lawyer for the government used the word, I haven't heard the word agitator used that often since, I was a teenager watching the civil rights movement. And, nobody pointed out to him that agitation is actually, you're allowed to agitate. That's something you're allowed to do. So they're really, really resisting the idea that there's freedom to protest, and they're doing it in part by scattered violence. The most dramatic one came last weekend when a two 84-year-old, an 84-year-old couple, one Vietnam veteran on a walker and his wife, were beaten to the ground and had to be taken to the hospital for basically standing in the street where they had a right to be. It's just random violence. It's supposedly, I don't know if the idea is to spread terror or provoke a violent reaction. It's very
Yeah.
important to President Trump that there be all kinds of violence and carnage in Portland. And the people of Portland have basically responded. Their response is basically, Diane Keaton died this week, right? And their response has been la di da, right? La di da. You are so scary. You are the big bad wolf. Oh yes, and it's really quite a sight.
Garrett, you are first and foremost a law professor. So let's talk a little bit about the spurious legal basis for Trump's deployment of troops, not just to Portland, but to cities across the country. So far, the president has federalized the National Guard and he's sent them to Washington, D.C., Portland. He sent them to Chicago, now Memphis, and he's claiming that he can do this under federal law, in particular statute Title 10 of the U.S. Code, Section 12406. And that allows the president to deputize the National Guard under very specific circumstances. But what exactly does this statute say? And does the situation in Portland fit what the statute
Well, this
describes?
the statute, it's obvious that federalization of the National Guard is to be the exception. This is the descendant of the state militia from the founding period. But it can be federalized if the United States is invaded by a foreign power, if there is a rebellion or insurrection, or if there is law breaking that the federal authorities cannot manage with the forces at their disposal. And the courts so far have been fairly careful in asking the obvious question, which is that what's happening? Right? The administration has taken the position that no one gets to review the president's decision. There's an insurrection if the president says there's an insurrection. The two district judges, Judge Immergut in Portland and Judge Perry in Illinois, have both taken a very careful look at what the administration has said and what the administration has done, and both have concluded that the government is out of compliance with the statute, that there is no, well, there's no invasion by a foreign power, though I expect hourly President Trump to claim that. There is no invasion by a foreign power. There is no rebellion in the sense of the word that the statute uses it. And, ICE and the Federal Protection Service they've had to work overtime. They've had to bring some personnel in from other jurisdictions. That, the judges have said, doesn't fit the definition of unable to execute the laws. This is something much more serious. And I wrote in my piece from Portland that the question in front of the courts is, if the president says 2 + 2 = 1 million, do the courts have to accept that? There's only one case on this, and that is a case called Newsom versus Trump. And in that case, Gavin Newsom brought a lawsuit saying that the federalization of the California National Guard in its protest didn't comply with the statute. And the court found that it actually did, that what was going on in California was serious enough, but that the troops could not be used for law enforcement as a result of the Posse Comitatus Act.
Got it. So here's a little bit concerning part, though. It seems that the appeals courts might be skeptical of district court judges' ability to make their own judgments about the facts. And there's a three-judge panel on the Ninth Circuit. Two of the three judges on that panel were Trump appointees. And they seem to think that the courts owe the president extraordinary deference on matters related to the use of the military. And then we saw the appeals court in Illinois, which issued a one-page ruling saying that Trump can federalize the guard but can't deploy them. What do you make of these rulings? And what does that
Well,
say about what the Supreme Court might think?
as far as the actual orders, which is that the federalization remains, but they can't be deployed, that seems to me to be relatively ordinary prudence on the part of the appeals courts. It doesn't change the situation on the ground. We don't have the troops coming out of barracks and taking up positions in the streets, and I think that's all to the good. Now, I listened carefully to the Ninth Circuit argument. As you note, two of the three judges on the Ninth Circuit are Trump appointees. And let me just make a point, and that is Judge Immergut, who delivered a stinging opinion, a bench slap to the administration, and said the president's proclamations are simply untethered to the facts. She also is a Trump appointee. And so, I certainly don't want anyone listening to this to say, oh, well, Trump appointees are all in the bag for the administration. But the appeals court judges seem to think that if the president says something is true, they have to assume that it is true. They seem to live in a world much more of kind of formalistic rules than, what a district judge, a trial judge, has to deal with facts all the time. And Judge Immergut, in her opinion, she quoted Judge Henry Friendly and saying, there is no reason for judges to be more gullible than the average person. And she just said, I'm not falling for it. I'm not having it. You haven't brought me anything. Much the same thing went on in Illinois, where the district judge also pointed out a series of statements by the president stating that he was sending in the National Guard to enforce the law and fight crime, which, of course, under the Posse Comitatus Act, they can't do
Can't
that.
do that.
And the idea, which the administration is now claiming in front of the courts, is that they want to send troops in to protect federal property. That the ICE headquarters is it's in imminent danger of being toilet papered or something, really bad like that. And, these are both fact heavy decisions. The courts, this is a preliminary decision. The district court intends to have a trial on the facts. I don't know what the Ninth Circuit is going to order. I don't feel very hopeful that they're going to back up the trial judge. And the Seventh Circuit, who knows?
David French argued in an interesting column in the New York Times that presidents forfeit deference when they don't act in good faith. Do you agree with that? Is that what
Well,
we're seeing here?
I think if the president of the United States had to act in good faith, then none of the actions taken by the government since January of this year would have any effect. I do think that the one decision under the statute 12046, which is again Newsom versus Trump, in that the administration said no court can review. This is purely the president's decision. The court said, no, that doesn't make any sense because there's a statute and Congress is delegating its authority to the president under certain circumstances. So the question is, how closely do we look at what the circumstances are? And what the court said was it has to be, the president has to have a colorable claim under honest judgment. They said extraordinary deference. If it's a close call, the House wins, the president wins. But it has to be colorable. It has to be honest. To stand on the ramparts as Secretary Noem did and point down and say, "I'm staring down that guy in a chicken suit because I'm in such danger." That's not good faith. The administration has not displayed good faith at all. And one of the struggles that's going on in the lower federal courts on a wide variety of cases is whether the court is going to listen to the administration just get up and lie about facts
Mhm.
that everyone knows, about facts that are readily available, and say, well, the president says this is true, and therefore we must act as if it's true. And secondly, hovering over this, like the brooding omnipresence of unreason, is this Supreme Court and its habit of just striking without warning and destroying orders without explanation. So we will see what happens. I do think it's really important for listeners to understand there's no major violence in Portland to the extent that the Trump administration wants to run troops in. They are hoping to provoke violence. And I think that people should be very skeptical of reports that Molotov cocktails are being thrown or things of this sort, simply because it is a well known tactic of law enforcement, has been, since I was a kid covering street riots in the 60s, for police to put undercover operatives in the crowd in order to give the police an excuse to come out and arrest.
Mhm.
And certainly when we had the big protests in Portland where there was a certain amount of violence, I was there and I saw activity that I'm reasonably sure was undercover police activity designed to provoke violence in what was basically a very mannerly protest, whatever you may have heard. My wife pointed out that we were marching toward the federal building, 300 strong, and we got to the intersection and the thing flashed, don't walk. And so the protesters said, stop, it says don't walk, right? So they waited until it said walk and then they walked. So that's, an example of the overall tenor. And the idea was they were bringing in the big guns, they were bringing in the enforcers. And that turned out to be a contingent of Portland area moms carrying vacuum cleaners. The idea being that they were here to clean up the streets and so forth. And that really is the spirit of Portland. We have seen a lot of attacks by federal law enforcement since then. And I'm really proud of this city. Let's hope that peace prevails. We've got a president who wants to win a foreign peace prize so he can begin war on his own country.
Well, Garrett, thank you very much for talking to us today. I'm Ann Kim, Senior Editor of the Washington Monthly, and I was speaking with Garrett Epps, Legal Affairs Editor for the Washington Monthly. Thank you for watching. Take
And
care.
keep Portland weird.